The mountain took me the way it takes everything on the scarn, without a sound, and all at once. One breath I was leading my horse down the throat of the high pass with the last light going gray on the peaks, my guard strung out behind me in the drifts. The next breath the whole white shoulder of the mountain above us let go. There was no warning worth the name. A crack like the spine of the world breaking, a hiss that swelled into a roar, and then the slope I stood on simply stopped being a slope and became a river of snow that swallowed the light. I remember reaching for my horse and finding only cold. I remember being lifted and turned and driven down as though a great hand had closed over me, and I remember thinking, with the strange calm that comes when a thing is already done, that a king who had spent 40 years listening for threats on the wind had finally been killed by a mountain that made no threat at all. Then the white closed over my head and packed itself around my chest, and I was buried alive in the dark. I do not know how long I hung there. Snow, when it settles from a slide, sets hard as stone. It held my arms where they were. It held my legs. It pressed on my ribs so that each breath had to be fought for, and each one came shallower than the last. There was a little pocket of air at my face, no bigger than my two hands, and I spent it slowly, and I knew when it was gone I would not wake. I had faced death before. I had led my wolves into war and out the other side, had stood over the bodies of men who had wanted my throat, had ruled the North so long that half my people could not remember an alpha who was not me. I was not afraid of dying, but I found, buried in that dark with the last of my air, that I was bitterly, achingly sorry not for the kingdom which would go on and not for myself, but for something I could not name. A whole life I had lived, and there was a room in it I had never entered, and now I never would. I did not have a word for what was in that room. I only knew that I was dying beside a door I had never opened, and it grieved me more than the dying did. That was the last clear thought I had. After it there was only cold, and the slow narrowing of everything to a single point of dark. And then light. Not much. A gray seam of it high and to my left where a hand had punched through the packed snow. Then the seam widened. Then it became a hole, and then an arm to the shoulder, and then a face, close over mine, breathing hard, streaked with snow and effort. "You're alive," the face said. "Look at me, you're alive. Don't you dare stop now, I've near broke my hands getting to you." I could not answer. I could barely draw the thin, cold air that came pouring in through the hole she'd made. But I fixed my eyes on hers because they were the only thing in the whole white waste that was warm, and I held to them the way a drowning man holds to a rope. She dug. God above, how she dug. She had no shovel that I ever saw, only her two hands in thick sodden gloves, and when the gloves failed her she tore them off and dug with her bare fingers, breaking the set snow away from my chest a handful at a time, talking the whole while in a low, steady voice as though I were a spooked horse she meant to gentle. "There now. There's your arm. Don't help me, you've no strength, let me. There's your shoulder. Almost, almost. The cold must have been eating her hands alive." She never once stopped. When she had my arms free she got them over her shoulders and hauled, and the snow gave me up with a wet groan, and the two of us went over backward into the drift together. For a moment we only lay there, both of us heaving for breath, the sky wheeling gray above us. Then she was up on her knees, hands on my face, turning it to hers. "Can you walk?" I tried to tell her no. What came out was nothing at all. "No," she answered herself, reading me. All right then, it's not far. Nothing's ever as far as it looks up here." It was far. I know now it was the better part of a mile in a rising storm, with a man near twice her weight who could do almost nothing to help her. She got me up somehow, my arm over her shoulders, her arm locked around my back, and she walked me off that killing slope one dragging step at a time, and every step she talked, and every step I lived because she would not let me do otherwise. I remember very little of that walk. I remember that the wind rose until it screamed. I remember that once I went down and could not rise, and lay in the snow certain I would go no farther, and she knelt in front of me in the blizzard and took my face in her ruined hands and said, fierce and quiet, "I have not carried you this far to bury you at my own door. Get up, get up." And there was such a plain refusal in her, such a flat unwillingness to let the mountain have me, that I got up. For her, because she would not permit the alternative. And I remember the door. A low door in a low stone house half sunk into the mountainside, banked with snow to the eaves, a single square of yellow light in the whole dark of the pass. She got it open with her shoulder and got me over the threshold and let me down onto the floor by the hearth, and then she was gone back out into the storm to bar the door, I thought muzzily. But no. She came back dragging her own gear and a bundle of wood, and only then did she throw the bar and turn to me. The last thing I saw before the warmth and the exhaustion took me under was her face in the firelight, bent close to mine, her cracked, bleeding hands hovering over me as though she did not quite know where to begin, and behind the worry in her eyes, a kind of wonder, as if she too had felt something pass between us in the snow that she had no word for either. Then the dark came back, but it was a warm dark this time, and I let it have me. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was not afraid of what I would wake to. I woke to firelight and the smell of something cooking, and the strange, unfamiliar sensation of being warm all the way through. I did not move at first. A lifetime of ruling had taught me to learn a room before I let it know I was in it. I was lying on a pallet by a stone hearth, wrapped in more blankets than the little house could easily have owned, stripped of my sodden clothes and put into a dry shirt far too small for me, so that it strained across my shoulders. My hands and feet had been rubbed and wrapped. There was a cup of something warm sitting close by my head where a waking man could reach it. Every single thing about my waking had been thought of before I woke. I turned my head and there she was. She sat cross-legged before the fire with a wide, flat basket in her lap, sorting dried herbs by the light, and I looked at her properly for the first time. Younger than I'd have guessed from her strength in the snow, though not young. A woman grown, with the weathered fineness that the high country gives to those who survive it. Brown hair bound back off a face made for plainness, and yet, to me, in that firelight, the most arresting thing I had ever looked upon. Her hands, moving among the herbs, were wrapped in clean linen, where the snow had torn them raw, saving me. And there was the thing I had felt in the drift and had no name for. Lying there watching her, I felt it again, and this time it did not pass. It settled. I had heard the bond spoken of all my life. My mother had told me of it when I was a boy, that somewhere in the world was the one soul made to meet mine, and that when I found her I would know, that every alpha of our blood had known. I had waited for it through my whole long reign and it had never come, and I had made a hard peace with its absence. I had told my council, more than once and with a king's finality, that I would take no Luna I did not feel in my blood, and since I felt nothing in my blood, they would have to be content with an heir named from among my cousins. I had believed I was a man the bond had simply passed over. It had not passed me over. It had only been waiting, all my life, in a stone house on the Scarn Pass, for a mountain to bury me at her feet. I want to tell you how it felt, because it was not what I had expected. I had imagined, as a younger man imagines these things, a striking, a fire, a seizing, a wolf's want rising up to claim. It was not that. What I felt, watching her sort her herbs by the fire, was that the endless, restless packing I had carried behind my ribs since I was a boy, the thing that had made me a watchful king and a lonely man, the part of me that had never once in 40 years been able to lie down and be still, lay down. It lay down and was quiet. For the first time in my life I was not listening for the next threat on the wind. I was simply, wholly here in this room, and there was nowhere else in the world I needed to be. That was the room I had grieved for, dying in the snow. The door I had never opened, and she had dug me out of my grave with her bare hands and carried me straight through it without either of us knowing. "You're awake," she said without looking up. "I could hear your breathing change." She set the basket aside and came to kneel by me and laid the back of her hand against my brow and frowned in a professional sort of way that made me want, absurdly, to smile. "No fever. That's more than you deserve after the state I found you in. Can you talk yet?" Yes, I said, my voice came out a wreck. I think so. Good, drink first. She got an arm under my shoulders. She was so much stronger than her frame promised, and lifted me enough to get the cup to my lips. It was broth, salted, faintly bitter with something medicinal. Slow, you've had nothing but snow inside you for a day and a night. A day and a night, I repeated. You slept through all of it. I wasn't sure you'd wake. She said it plainly, without drama, the way she said everything. The pass'll be shut a week at least after a slide like that. You'll not be going anywhere, so you may as well mend. I lay back. You saved my life. I dug you out of the snow, she said, as though these were different things. The mending you'll do yourself. I only see to it that you've the chance. She sat back on her heels and looked at me, and for the first time something uncertain crossed her face. You'll not remember much, I'd think. Do you know how you came to be up on the shoulder in a slide gear with the light going? Only you were dressed too fine for a trapper and too plain for a lord, and I couldn't make you out. I understood in that moment that she did not know me. It should not have surprised me. I had been crossing the pass in my plainest riding gear, my regalia packed away, my few guards behind me, a hard man on a hard road, not a king in his hall. She had never in her life been down off this mountain to the seat of Vardin where my face was known. To her I was a stranger the snow had spat out. She had not saved the Alpha King. She had saved a man. And I found, lying there, that I did not want to tell her. It was not a lie I meant to build into anything. It was only that I had never once in my whole life been looked at the way she was looking at me, as a person and not a power. Every soul I had ever known had seen the crown first, and the man behind it never, or barely, or only when I was a boy. This woman had knelt in a blizzard and put her torn hands on my face and refused to let me die. And she had done it for nothing, for a stranger, for no reward that she could name, because that was simply who she was. If I named myself now, the crown would come down between us like a wall, the way it always did. She would go stiff and careful. The plain warmth in her would fold itself away. I was too newly found to let that happen, so I did a thing I am not proud of and have never regretted. I was carrying word, I said, which was true enough. I'd been coming back from a treaty hunt at the far border. Between holds, the slide caught me short. I'm called Severin, which was also true. It is only that I left off the rest of it. Severin, she said, trying the name. I'm Neve, a small dry smile. It means snow, my mother told me in the old tongue. She'd have laughed to know I've spent my whole life digging it off the pass. She rose, brisk again. Rest, Severin. There's broth when you want it, and I'll not be far. The storm's not done with us. She went to the fire, and I watched her, and behind my ribs the thing that had never once been still went on lying quiet, and I thought, however long the pass is shut, let it be longer. The pass kept us a week and more, and they were the strangest and the best days of my life. I mended slowly at first and then faster, and as I mended I learned her the way you learn a country by walking it. Neve was a keeper of the pass. It was not a title anyone had given her. It was a thing she had simply become. Her mother had kept the waystones before her, and her mother before that, the low stone cairns that marked the safe line of the trail when the snow rose over everything, and one wrong step took a traveler off a cliff he could not see. Neve tended them. She kept the little shelters stocked with wood and dried meat against the ones who came through unprepared. And when the mountain took someone, and the mountain was always taking someone, she went out into whatever weather it took, and she dug. She told me none of this as a boast. I dragged it out of her a piece at a time over those days, and every piece she gave up almost with reluctance, as though it embarrassed her to be spoken of. In the whole week she never once said a word about the danger she went into for strangers, or the count of the lives she'd pulled from the snow, or the fact that she did it alone, unpaid, unthanked, unknown, on the worst road in the north, and had done it for years. But the mountain told me, even when she wouldn't. On the third day, when I could stand, I made my slow way to the one small window and looked out at the storm, and I saw them. Wolves. Not my wolves, not the sleek pack wolves of the lowland holds. These were the great gray-white wolves of the high country, the moon wolves, huge and shaggy and old as the peaks that no alpha in living memory had been able to bring to heel. My own grandfather had tried and failed. They answered nothing and no one. They were the mountain's own, wild past taming. There were 3 of them in the lee of Neve's house, out of the wind, lying at ease as tame hounds by a hall fire. "They come," Neve said behind me, following my look unsurprised. "In the hard weather, I don't know why, my mother said they came for her too. She brought me a cup and stood beside me at the window, watching them with a fondness that had no fear in it at all. I leave them what I can spare. They've never touched me, nor I them. We keep the past between us, I suppose." She smiled her small smile. "They're better company than most who come through, and quieter." I said nothing. I could not have said anything, because I knew what I was seeing and she did not. The moon wolves did not come to keepers. They did not come to kindness. They came to blood, to the true old blood of the mountain, the line the peaks themselves acknowledged. They were the reason there had never been a Luna crowned in the north that the high country truly bowed to. Every alpha's chosen bride had been a lowland woman, and the moon wolves had held themselves apart from every one, wild and unmoved, for as long as there had been a Varding to rule. My council had spent my whole reign urging highborn daughters on me, and not one of them could have drawn a single moon wolf out of the peaks to lie at her door. They were lying at Neve's. She was not merely my fated mate, though that alone would have been enough to remake my whole life. She was the true Luna the mountain had been holding in reserve, unnamed and unknowing, keeping its stones and feeding its wolves in a stone hut on the scarn while 100 miles below. Kings crowned the wrong women, and wondered why the north never quite lay easy under them. I looked at her, standing at the window with her chipped cup in her wrapped hands, watching the wolves with plain affection, entirely unaware that she was the answer to a question my whole line had been failing to ask for 300 years. "You're starring," she said, not unkindly. "Forgive me," I said. "You're not. I've never met anyone like you." "There's no one like anyone," she said, dismissing it, and went to see to the fire. But I saw the color come up in her face, and I saw that she was pleased, and I hoarded that the way I had hoarded nothing in my life. I will not pretend those days were only wonder. There was the plain sweetness of them too, and it undid me more thoroughly than the wonder did. She taught me to splice a snapped snare line because my hands wanted work, and she would not let a mending man sit idle. We argued, gently, over whether the broth wanted more salt. She caught me trying to haul wood before my ribs would allow it and scolded me like a boy, and I, who had not been scolded by anyone in 30 years, who could have had a man's tongue for less, stood and took it and felt, God help me, cherished. In the evening she sat with her herbs and I sat across the fire and we talked, or did not talk, and the silence between us was the first easy silence I had ever known. I had spent my life in halls full of people and been alone in every one of them. In that small stone room with one plain woman and a fire, I was not alone for the first time, and I understood at last what all my empty years had been missing. I told her things I had never told anyone. Not who I was, I still held that back, and told myself it was to protect the thing we had, and half believed it. But I told her true things, which is harder. I told her that I had ruled a long time and grown tired of it, that I had made a peace with never being known by anyone, and found the peace was a lie, that I had come to think a man could do everything right and rule well and be, at the last, entirely unloved, and that he might not even notice the lack until something, I did not say someone, showed him what he'd gone without. She listened the way she did everything, without hurry, and when I was done she was quiet a while, and then she said, "You talk like a man who's been high up and lonely." "Perhaps I have." "Then you were doing it wrong," she said, "the being high up. There's no height worth a thing if it puts you out of reach of the people who'd have kept you warm." She said it lightly, sorting her herbs, not knowing she'd laid my whole reign open and found the flaw in it that all my counselors together never had. "But you're not high up here. Here you're just a man who owes me a great deal of firewood." And she smiled, and I laughed, actually laughed, aloud, which I could not remember doing, and something in her face at the sound of it made me think she'd been trying to make me do exactly that. On the sixth night, the wolves came to the door. Not to the lee of the house this time, to the door itself. I woke to the sound of them and to Neve rising in the dark, and I was up before I'd thought, putting myself between her and whatever it was, the old king's instinct to shield still faster than sense. She put a hand on my arm. "Easy," she said. "Come, but quietly. They've never done this." She opened the door, and the storm had blown itself out, and the whole pass lay under a moon so bright the snow burned silver with it. And on the trodden snow before her door sat not 3 wolves but a dozen, the whole high pack, come down out of the peaks, huge and pale and silent, their breath smoking in the cold. They did not stir at the sight of me. They did not so much as look at me. Every one of those wild eyes was fixed on Neve, and as she stepped out into the moonlight the whole pack, as one, lowered their great heads to the snow. I heard her breath catch. "They've never," she whispered. "Severin, they've never done this, not once, not for my mother even," and she looked back at me, and I saw that she was, for the first time since I'd known her, afraid not of the wolves but of the size of the thing happening to her, the way a person is afraid at the edge of a truth too big to stand on. And I could not lie to her any more. Not there. Not under that moon, with the mountain's own wolves bowing to her in the snow and her frightened eyes on mine asking me to make sense of it. "They know you," I said. "They've always known you. Neve, I have to tell you what I am." And I did. I told her all of it, standing in her doorway with the pack bowed before us. Who I was, what I ruled, why the wolves knelt, what her blood was, what it meant, the 300 years of Varding crowning the wrong women while the true Luna of the North kept the waystones on the scarn and never knew. I told her the thing I had felt in the snow when she dug me out, the thing that had lain quiet behind my ribs every day since, the thing I had no right to say to a woman I'd deceived, and I said it anyway because it was true, and because I would not add another falsehood to the one I'd let stand. I told her that I had known within a day of waking that she was my fated mate, and that I had held my name back not to trap her, but because for 1 week I had wanted, selfishly, wildly, to be looked at by one person as a man and not a crown, and that I saw now the cost of it, and I was sorry. She heard all of it in silence there in the cold, the wolves' breath smoking around us. And when I finished, she stepped back from me over her own threshold and put the door's frame between us, and I felt the wall come down that I had dreaded from the first, but it was not the crown that had raised it. It was the lie. "You let me talk to you," she said low, "as if you were nobody, for 6 days, knowing what you were." "Yes." "You let me scold you over firewood." "Yes, and I'd not trade it for my kingdom." That was true too, and she heard that it was true, and it did not soften her, and it should not have. "Get some sleep," she said, in a voice I had not heard from her, flat and closed. "The pass'll open in a day or 2. Your people will come looking for their king." And she shut the door on the moonlight and the kneeling wolves, and did not look at me again that night. My guard found the house the next morning. They had been searching the whole valley below the slide for a week, working up as the snow let them, certain by then that they were digging for a body. When they came over the last rise and saw me standing whole in the door of a keeper's hut, there was a sound went up from them I will not forget, grown wolves, hard men, weeping in the snow at the sight of their king alive. My second, Halden, reached me first and gripped me by both arms and could not speak, and then remembered himself and went down on one knee in the snow, and behind him the whole guard followed, and there in an instant was everything I had spent a week away from, the bowing, the my lord, the wall. I looked past them to the door, and Neve was standing in it, watching 24 armed wolves kneel to the man she'd pulled out of an avalanche and put in a shirt 3 sizes too small. I watched her understand, completely and finally, what she had done. And I watched her decide in the plain, unhurried way she decided everything, that it was not her place, and that she would ask for nothing, and that she would let the king go back to his world where he belonged. She did not run. She did not weep. She simply stepped back inside and began, quietly, to pack my mended clothes into a bundle for the road, because there was a job to be done and she was a woman who did the job in front of her. She brought the bundle out and put it in my hands. "You'll want to go while the light's good," she said. "The pass is treacherous the first days after it opens. Keep to the waystones. My mother built the far ones, they're true. And then, because she could not help being who she was even then, there's dried meat in the top for the three of you at the front. You'll not make the hold by dark." "Neve." "Go home, Severin," she said, and it was gentle and it was final, and it broke something in me to hear my name in her mouth for what she plainly meant to be the last time. "You've a kingdom. I've a pass. It was a strange week and I'm glad you lived. That's all it needs to be." I went. God forgive me, I went because she asked it, and because I had already taken enough from her that she had not offered, and I would not take her dignity too by making a scene in front of my kneeling guard. I let Halden set me on a horse and I rode down off the scarn with 24 wolves at my back, and I did not look behind me, because if I had looked behind me I would not have been able to leave. I got as far as the first waystone her mother built. It stood true, as she'd promised, a low cairn dark against the snow, marking the safe line down. And I sat my horse before it in the cold bright morning, and I looked at those stones, set by a keeper's hands, tended by a keeper's hands, generations of women asking nothing and saving strangers on the worst road in the north. And I thought about a king who had ruled 40 years from a warm hall, and never once climbed up here to see who kept his people alive on his own mountain. I thought about my council and their highborn daughters, and the moon wolves that had held themselves apart from everyone. I thought about the endless packing behind my ribs that had never in my life lain down, until a woman warmed my hands by a fire and told me I'd been doing the being high up wrong. "My lord," said Halden, "the light's going to turn." "Yes," I said, and I turned my horse around back up the pass toward the house. "My lord." "Go home, Halden, take them home. Tell the council the king is well, and the king is staying up the mountain a while, and the council may govern itself in the meantime as it has always secretly wished to." I was already climbing. "And Halden, send up masons in the spring. The waystones on the high shoulder want mending. It's a disgrace to the crown that they've gone so long untended." I do not think he understood. I did not need him to. I climbed back up the scarn alone, on foot, leading my horse, the way she had walked me down it, one dragging step at a time, and I did not stop until I stood again at her low door with the light going gold on the peaks behind me. I did not knock as a king. I knocked as a man who owed a great deal of firewood. She opened it. She had been weeping, I think, though she'd washed her face. She was too proud to let me see it, and I was too wise to say I had. She looked at me standing there with my horse and no guard and the whole empty pass behind me, and she said, "You're meant to be halfway down by now." "I got as far as your mother's waystone," I said, "and I found I'd left the room I've been looking for my whole life, and I turned around." "Severin." "I'm not asking you to be a queen," I said, before she could send me off again, and I saw that stop her, because that was the thing she'd been bracing against, the crown coming to swallow her plain good life. "I know what the wolves mean. I know what your blood is. Half my council would have you carried down the mountain and crowned by force to settle 300 years of the north lying uneasy, and I'll tell you plainly I'll not let a single one of them near you, not for the whole of Varding. I'm not here for the north's Luna. The north can wait." I set the words down carefully because they were the truest I owned. "I'm here for the woman who dug me out of the snow because that was simply who she was, and then taught a lonely king how to laugh, and I am asking her, only asking, and she may say no, and I'll mend the waystones anyway and trouble her no further, whether she might let me stay, and keep the pass, with her, as a man who's finally learned how high up is worth being." The wind moved on the peaks. Somewhere above us a wolf called, long and low, and was answered. "You'd not last a winter," she said, but her voice had gone unsteady. "You've soft hands and no sense, and you tried to lift wood with 3 cracked ribs." "Then I'll want teaching," I said. I hear the keeper of this pass is very hard on a man who won't be told." And she laughed a wet, broken, wonderful laugh, and put her wrapped hand over her mouth, and then she stopped hiding it, and let me see her face, all of it, and it was the face of a woman deciding to open a door she had shut against hope a long time ago. "The council will hate it," she said. "The council," I said, "may govern itself and has been longing to. The wolves will keep coming. Let them. I'd like to know the mountain that kept you for me." "You are," she said, "a very foolish sort of king." "I have it on good authority," I said, "that I've been doing the whole thing wrong. I mean to learn it over from someone who knows." She stood aside from the door. That was all. She only stepped back and let me over the threshold, out of the cold and the going light, into the small warm room with the fire and the herbs and the one plain window, and shut the door behind us against the pass. And it was not the wall going up this time. It was the door I'd grieved for, dying in the snow, standing open at last, and me walking through it on my own 2 feet, and her hand, torn from saving me, warm in mine. We keep the pass together now. I did go back down, in the end, but not to stay, and not to be crowned in some cold hall while she stood a stranger at the edge of it. When the council would not leave off, I brought them up the mountain instead, the whole grumbling lot of them, and I stood them in the snow before her door and let them see what I had seen. The moon wolves of the high country lying at the feet of a keeper's daughter, bowing to her as they had bowed to no Luna in 300 years, the mountain itself nomming what my whole line had failed to find. There was no argument to be made against it after that. There was nothing to crown. She was already what she was. The North knew its Luna the moment the peaks did, and has lain easier under her than under any crown before her, though she has never worn one and says she never will. She says a crown would only get in the way of the digging. So there is no grand ending to give you, no throne and no coronation, and I find I am glad of it. What there is this. There is a stone house on the Scarn Pass with 2 people in it now instead of 1, and the waystones on the high shoulder are mended and kept true, and the shelters are stocked against the ones who come through unready. And when the mountain takes someone, for the mountain is always taking someone, 2 of us go out into the weather now and dig. My hands are not soft anymore. She taught me, and she was very hard on me, and I would not have had it gentler. And on the first hard night of every winter, when the snow comes down and shuts the pass, the wolves come to our door, the whole high pack, pale and enormous and old as the peaks, and lie in the lee of the house out of the wind, keeping the mountain with us as they have always kept it with her. I go out to them with what we can spare, the way her mother did, and her mother before, and I sit a while in the cold beside the wildest creatures in the north, who will let me near only because I belong to her, and I watch the one small square of yellow light that is our window, and the woman moving inside it, and I think of a king who died beside a door he'd never opened and was dug out of his grave by the only hands that could have carried him through it. The endless packing behind my ribs has never come back. It lay down the day she warmed my hands by this fire, and it has stayed down, and I know now what it was. It was a man listening his whole life for the one voice that would tell him he was found. I heard it in a blizzard in a stranger's mouth, saying, "You're alive. Don't you dare stop now." I never have. I never will. There is too much snow to dig, and she needs the help, and there is nowhere in all the wide north I would rather be than here, high up at last in the only way that was ever worth being, with the fire warm and her hand in mine and the wolves keeping watch in the silver dark outside our door.